So I wanted to come on here and just make a little bit of a sort of a response video, I guess is what you'd call it, on Billy Carson. You know, he's a popular figure. He runs an organization which seems to be very popular online. He was recently on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I listened to that episode. And although there were some pretty ridiculous things being said, particularly about the Dead Sea Scrolls, that are just flat out incorrect, what I want to do in this video is I want to play and react to not the Joe Rogan Experience conversation between Billy Carson and Joe Rogan, but actually the statements that Billy Carson says on Andrew Schultz's Flagrant Podcast, because there he addresses specifically the Bible. And so he says a number of just like ridiculously outrageous things, but I'm going to play some things for you and show you why it's really important that, yes, we should be doing our own research, but also the people who are the experts also matter to a certain degree. Like, they're not right just because they're the experts, but there are people who know things in regards to the publicly available evidence that are just not common knowledge. And a lot of people go around saying and using the right words, but in the completely wrong way. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play and react to this in particular. Okay, here we go.
You said that they had doctored the Bible. Mm-hmm. What's the earliest version of the Bible that exists?
One of the earliest versions is the Ethiopian Bible and the Sinai Bible.
Okay, pause right there. One of the earliest versions is the Ethiopian Bible and the Sinai Bible. So the Ethiopian Bible is written in a language called Ge'ez. And our oldest copy of that comes in the form of the Garema Gospels from potentially as early as the 4th century, more likely from the 6th century AD. But this is only the 4 Gospels. And they're very much a translation from the original Greek into the ancient Ethiopic language of Ge'ez. What Billy Carson appears to be talking about with the Sinai Bible, I believe, is Codex Sinaiticus, which is most likely our earliest copy of what we would think of as a Bible, in that it includes Genesis to Revelation all in one single volume. It dates from the 4th century. We, of course, have copies of each individual book of the Bible that exist in independent scrolls and books that predate those two documents by centuries. But I guess when Andrew asks about our earliest Bible, what he's probably referring to is what the Bible eventually started to look like as a single bound volume, what we would think of it as today. It was normative, though, for both Jews and Christians prior to the 4th century to consider individual books as scripture without them all being bound in a single volume like we have today. But I think what he's talking about when he says the Ethiopian Bible is probably the Ge'ez Gospels, in the Garema Gospels, and the Sinai Bible is probably Codex Sinaiticus.
The earliest version of the Bible, or one of the earliest, is in Ethiopia. What are the differences between that Bible and, let's say, like the King James?
Okay, and a couple of things. The first, the Old Testament is the Torah from the Ethiopian Torah.
Wait, the oldest Torah we have is also Ethiopian?
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's not true. The earliest copies of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, or what's sometimes referred to as the Pentateuch, were written in, that are written in Ge'ez. Once again, that's the language of ancient Ethiopia. Those fall comfortably into the medieval era, and actually the late medieval era. We're talking 14th to 16th centuries AD. We actually know that Syrian missionaries brought versions of the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, down into Ethiopia, into the kingdom of Aksum early on, and then those were translated into Ge'ez. But it is just patently false that this is the earliest Bible, the oldest Bible. We have fragments of Genesis from the Dead Sea Scrolls that predate the Ethiopian ones by over 1,000 years. So this is just, it's incorrect.
Oldest version of Old Testament, Ethiopia.
Ethiopia.
Oldest version of New Testament, either Sinai or Ethiopia.
So once again, no to the Ethiopian Ge'ez being the oldest New Testament, maybe to Codex Sinaiticus. So we have other Greek copies contemporary with Sinaiticus, like Codex Vaticanus and Codex Washingtonianus. If we're thinking of a Bible as a single-bound book, then sure, that's Sinaiticus. But P45, of which sections are housed in Dublin, Chester Beatty Library, and Vienna Austrian National Library, those are our earliest collections of the four Gospels and Acts, all in one volume. And it could predate Sinaiticus by as much as 200 years. So we also have manuscripts in whole or in part from many individual copies of the Gospels in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So no, the Ethiopian Ge'ez sections of the New Testament, which is primarily just the Gospels, are not the oldest Bible.
What are the differences we see in these and then the newer versions of the text?
Well, what's interesting is the text, there's less mistranslations.
Less mistranslations, got it.
In the Ethiopian Bible and the Sinai Bible, there's about 12 to 14,000 differences than the more modernized King James Version.
And what are the differences?
Well, for example, Moses never crossed the Red Sea. He crossed the Sea of Reeds, which is a closer, much smaller and easier sea to cross.
So this is a good example that Billy really does not know what he's talking about and appears to have absolutely no contemporary competency in the biblical languages. So as a side note, I've heard him in other places like his Joe Rogan Experience interview claim he's dabbled in Sumerian cuneiform. And given his continued misguided and downright ignorant comments on other ancient languages like this, I highly doubt he has any actual understanding of Sumerian. Case in point, the Hebrew term Yam Suf means Sea of Reeds. So in Joshua 24:6, when it says that God brought your fathers out of Egypt and you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea, that term at the end of the translation there is Yam Suf. So when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek in the 3rd century BC, Yam Suf was translated into Eruthra Thalassa, which literally means the Red Sea. So this phrase is the same term that the author of Hebrew uses when he recounts the Exodus story as well. But if the Exodus account in the Ethiopian Bible says the Sea of Reeds, that's because that is what the Hebrew calls it. It's not a different body of water. It's just Billy not knowing Hebrew and thinking he stumbled upon some sort of conspiratorial change, when in reality, it's just him unfortunately not knowing what he's talking about. And notice, Andrew is asking for differences and Billy isn't actually giving any. He's sharing factoids and using a lot of the right words in the wrong way, but none of what he's saying actually has anything to do with the question actually being asked concerning differences in the manuscripts. So once again, Yam Suf means Sea of Reeds. That's what the Hebrew Bible says. We draw the term not from the Hebrew Yam Suf, but from the Greek, which translates to Red Sea. And that's what it's called today, because that's what it was called eventually when the Hellenism took over the ancient world with Alexander the Great, and that was just the term that was used. So the English Bible uses the contemporary term that's drawn from the Greek translation of the Old Testament, but the Sea of Reeds is not a different body of water than the Red Sea.
Also, another mistranslation is the God. God is not supposed to be singular in the Bible. It's plural in all cases, gods with an S.
So Billy continues on his quest to prove to anyone who actually understands the biblical languages that he doesn't understand them. Because the ending im normally indicates a masculine plural in Hebrew. So Elohim, at face value, looks like a plural version of the word El, meaning God, and the im plural ending. And so therefore you could mistake it for then being the plural gods. Now, in some cases, Elohim does refer to plural gods. The problem with this is that the word Elohim is what's known as a concretized abstract plural. And this is a function within the Hebrew language where a plural word is used in a singular sense. It's true that this is outside of the norm of standard Hebrew grammar and syntax, but it's not some sort of mystery. This is standard kind of learn Hebrew 101 stuff. And a concretized abstract plural operates in a similar way to, say, the English word sheep. So we can have one sheep or 50 sheep. It's the verbs around the word, in both cases for Elohim and for sheep, that tell us whether we're dealing with a plural or a singular. This is just a display of complete ignorance of how Hebrew works and operates as a functional language. I've heard Billy Carson say this elsewhere. It's just not true. It's just an example of how he doesn't know and understand Hebrew. And one simple way to see how this renders and was understood is to go to, once again, the ancient Greek translations of the Hebrew. So some of which predate Jesus by hundreds of years, and see how they understand and render the plural word God in the Greek theos, because you have a plural and you have a singular form of that word in Greek. And the context in the Hebrew and both the ways that it's translated into Greek give us an indication of how it should be used and how it is being used. But when Billy Carson says, well, the word Elohim is plural and therefore it means gods, not God, it's just him displaying that he doesn't know how to read Hebrew.
In the Bible, you have the gods are Enlil, and who's also known as Yahweh in the Bible.
Yeah.
And you also have Amen-Ra, the great Amen. He's, when you say the Lord's Prayer, that's Enki's prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us our daily bread, blah, blah, blah. That's Ptah's prayer, who's also known as Enki. Enki.
I think the kindest way I can put this is nonsensical. I don't know a better way to put it. Enlil is the Sumerian god of the air, okay? It's not Yahweh. While it is true that later Mesopotamian lore incorporated Enlil and worshipped him as the king of the gods, he's firmly one of a pantheon of ancient Near Eastern gods who are worshipped by the Mesopotamians. Yahweh, on the other hand, is the god of the monotheistic faith of Judeo-Christianity. And there are two prayers that I think Billy could be talking about here. And so one is the prayer of Enki for Ashurbanipal, but it reads like this. Here, I pulled some up for you. Okay, so it says, I, Ashurbanipal, great king, mighty king, king of the world, king of Assyria, king of the four quarters of the world, king of kings, prince who has no rival, who by the command of the gods, Ashur, Shamash, and Marduk, who rules over the upper sea to the lower sea, and has subjugated all rules, who provides butler to the gods, as Esagil, the palace of Marduk, and the spouse of the gods, whose doorbell I made glisten like the stars, and the firmament who repairs the damaged parts of their sanctuaries, who establishes my protection over the cult centers, whose deeds are pleasing to all the gods, and whose shepherdship is sweet in the black-headed people. May Enki make my enemy's name and his descendants disappear from the lands, and have no pity on them. Does that sound like the Lord's Prayer? No. Okay, so the other potential candidate is Enkidu's prayer in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but that prayer is a request for Shamash, the Mesopotamian god, to visit him in a dream and grant him favorable omens. None of this is even analogous to Enki's prayer. I don't know where Billy is getting this from. Friends, there is nothing even remotely analogous to the Lord's Prayer in any of these ancient examples. Also, Ptah, the Egyptian god of creation, and Enki, who is the Sumerian god of the creation, they have similar roles within their respective societies, but neither the Egyptians would have thought of Ptah as Enki, nor the Sumerians thought Enki was Ptah. We go on.
I'll give you one big translation that's off, is they say, Jesus was crucified.
Whoa.
Well, that doesn't exist in the Sinai Bible.
What happened?
It doesn't exist in the book of Barnabas.
So let's go to Codex Sinaiticus. Now you can do this for yourself. You can go over to codexsinaiticus.org and you can click See the Manuscript. This is put on by the British Library. And so what I've done is I've just pulled up the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27 in Codex Sinaiticus. And right here, you say, okay, well, it denies that Jesus died on the cross. Find it. It's at the top. There. So I'm going to zoom in to up here where this is actually the beginning of verse 50, right? So it says right here, but Jesus again cried out with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. Right there. Spirit. Okay, Jesus cried out in a loud voice and he gave up his spirit. He gave up his spirit. This is language of death. It just is. I mean, you can go to any of the Gospels. Friends, they don't read any different. You can go to the Gospel of John. It's not like the Sinai Bible is something secret and magical. You know, the way that it's being communicated here is if this is like, this is some secret that Billy Carson has uncovered. This is not. This is just a 4th century copy of the Bible. And so you can, go through the Gospels and you can read them. That's Codex Sinaiticus. So when he says the book of Barnabas, I think what he's referring to is the Gospel of Barnabas, which was a 16th century forgery. Yes, the Gospel of Barnabas denies the crucifixion of Jesus took place. But that's because it was written a millennia and a half after the events as an apologetic against the standard Christian beliefs of the time. So there are multiple historical anachronisms in the Gospel of Barnabas, including the statement that the event of Jubilees happens every 100 years. That's what it says in the Gospel of Barnabas. Now, Jubilee is an ancient Jewish practice, but in the Old Testament, it's every 50 years. But this was moved by Pope Boniface to every 100 years in the year 1300. So it appears that whoever's writing the Gospel of Barnabas is misunderstanding what that is. He's referring to what is, yes, an ancient Jewish practice, but then he's sourcing it not in the time frame of the ancients, but actually in the time frame of, the 14th century. It also paraphrases sections of Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So we're talking about something that at its earliest is the 14th century, but is probably even between the 14th and the 15th century. So this is not an ancient document by any stretch.
So how did they kill him?
They didn't kill him. In Harvard Library, there is a book of Jesus' wife at the Harvard Seminary School.
So, yes, there is a fragment of the Gospel of Jesus' wife at Harvard. But this fragment has nothing to do with Jesus' death and is also a known forgery. I have an entire post on this debacle concerning the Gospel of Jesus' wife that you can check out. But this manuscript was a modern forgery, cleverly written on legitimate ancient papyrus. So someone found a piece of ancient papyrus and then made a forgery on top of it. And it was outed as a forgery because it made a few copyist errors that the forger carried over from an online PDF version of the Coptic text of the Gospel of Thomas, which was known as Grandin's Interlinear, is known as Grandin's Interlinear. And the forger, not truly knowing Coptic properly, copied from Grandin's Thomasine text, which only exists online, and in their supposed attempt to translate their forgery, outed themselves as having actually copied words from a digital version of the Gospel of Thomas. So they're taking a digital a version of the Gospel of Thomas in Coptic. They're trying to copy sections over into what they eventually tried to pass off as the Gospel of Jesus' wife, but it was a forgery. Everyone in the field of manuscript studies, text criticism, paleography, papyrology, all of this, it's all agreed upon to be modern forgery. This was a huge debacle for Karen King over at the Harvard Divinity School because she kind of staked her credibility on this being original, and then it turned out not to be.
The word for virgin was mistranslated from Aramaic into Greek. So the word originally meant, I think it was laga, which means young woman. By the time it got to Greek, it was translated wrongly into virgin, which then made it into the biggest part of the story of Jesus, which is that his mother was
So she
a
might
virgin.
not have been a virgin.
It's possible. But when I saw what convinced me, that's why I looked deeper.
Okay, Billy Carson says he looked deeper. I think the word he's talking about is the Hebrew word alma. I don't know what laga means, but it's not Aramaic, it's Hebrew, alma, which does in fact mean young woman. However, it more specifically refers to a young woman of marriageable age. So in other words, the word doesn't always mean virgin, but to say it doesn't ever mean virgin is just incorrect. And once again, we can see how the ancient Jewish understanding of the text was perceived by looking at the Greek translation of Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, where the text in question is translated from Alma into Parthenos. So Parthenos does specifically mean virgin in Greek. And by using this translation in the Greek version of Isaiah, it gives us a clear indication of how they understood Alma operating. So it doesn't specifically mean virgin, but it doesn't not mean virgin. And by translating it from Alma into Parthenos, what that indicates is that the ancient Jews saw this word in its meaning as being a virgin, right? A young woman of marriageable age that clearly means virgin, okay? It's the same word that Matthew then uses when he records the angel coming to Mary and saying, look, the virgin, Parthenos, will conceive and give birth to a son. Again, this is just Billy putting on display his lack of knowledge of both the biblical languages and how they were understood in the ancient context and are understood today.